So we're back on the record, and the next witness is Mr. Gordon. Mr. Gordon, I need to swear you in if you raise your right hand. Do you solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the testimony you will give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Affirm.
All right, and could you just state your name and spell it for me, please?
James R. Gorton, Gorton.
All right, Attorney Hitchcock-Cross, you can go ahead with your questioning of Mr. Gordon.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Gordon, are you employed by the city of Milwaukee?
No.
Are you employed by Milwaukee Public Schools?
Yes.
Okay, in what capacity are you employed by Milwaukee Public Schools?
I am the manager of the Employee Rights Administration Division, which is a branch of the Employment Relations Department, which is a department that's part of the Office of Human Resources.
Who's your supervisor?
Therese Freiberg, Employment Relations Director.
So your work in employment relations, that's distinct from employee rights, is that right?
Well, I'm actually, it's employee rights is part of employment relations, so it's considered employment relations, but it's a special component of employment relations.
Okay, do you supervise Yashika Spears?
My supervisor is Therese Freiberg. What's the question?
Do you supervise Yashika Spears?
Yes, I do.
Okay. How do you know other than supervision Yashika Spears?
I don't think I have any other knowledge of her other than
Fair enough. I got those questions in the wrong order, so excuse me there. Are you an attorney?
I have a law degree.
Do you practice law on behalf of the MPS?
No.
Okay. Do you know Miss Tate?
Yes.
How do you know Miss Tate?
I think I probably first encountered her when I held a different role in the district, and it might be helpful if I maybe lay out my most recent history with the district and the role I played. Would that be helpful?
It would be extremely helpful. I know there's been considerable debate about that.
So I was appointed as the manager of employee rights in 2011. In approximately November 2018, I began serving as acting employment relations director. And I held that role from November 2018 to November 2020. During that period of time, Therese Freiberg actually reported to me, and she actually was acting as manager of employee rights when I was acting as employment relations director. In November of 2020, I returned to my prior position as manager of employee rights, and Therese Freiberg began serving as acting employment relations director, and she was ultimately appointed in that position. So that's how the table lays as of today.
Okay, why did you return to your old role?
I was getting weary of acting as the employment relations director, and I wanted to be either appointed, or I told them, if you're not going to appoint me, I'm returning to my prior position. And so I did return to my prior position because they did not appoint me.
Okay, and by they, you mean the board did not appoint you?
The board did not appoint me.
And instead they promoted your subordinate, correct?
Correct. She had previously been appointed as employment relations director, probably in 2000, the single digits of 2000. And so there was some, movement, and so she did have experience in the position previously.
Okay. In October of 2019, what was your position?
Acting employment relations director.
Okay, and that's again, that's the highest, the pinnacle there for you, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're still a director now, you're just a director in a different department?
No, I am a manager.
Manager, I'm sorry, okay. It only took me 2 years to learn the difference, but I think I've got that clear now. Okay, so as your role as acting employee relations director, what training did you receive?
Oh, I attended seminars, and I received on-the-job training by the prior employment relations director, because that person was acting human resources chief. So everybody kind of went up a slot during that
Was that
2 year
Ms. Scopter or
period.
somebody else?
Pardon me?
Was that the person who moved up a slot? Was that Ms. Scopter or somebody else?
That was Ms. Gopter.
Okay. So your testimony is that you learned how to do your job from seminars and on-the-job training from Ms. Scopter, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any policy or procedural manuals that directed your duties as in that position?
I object to the form. I don't understand what you're asking.
Do
Can you
understand the
clarify?
question?
Can you
Sure.
clarify?
Were there any written instructions from MPS on how you were to do your job?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. And part of your job duties is to supervise employees' complaints about discrimination, among other things, correct?
So that falls within, I guess I should say, to make things more complicated, employee rights was not a component of employment relations for, I think, probably the first year while I was acting. But eventually there was a organizational change and it was weaved into employment relations. So previous to that, employee rights was a separate and distinct unit that reported directly to the chief. So
And sorry, which chief?
Chief of Human Resources.
Okay.
So as manager of employee rights, I directly supervised or oversaw internal complaint operations. As the acting employment relations director, I was essentially the second line oversight.
Okay. And so you were at that point in October of 2019, you were supervising both employee rights and employee relations complaints, correct?
I was second line oversight for that.
I'm sorry, I don't understand what second line oversight means. Can you explain that, please?
So the manager of employee rights, acting manager Therese Freiberg at that time, had oversight over internal complaints of discrimination, harassment. She reported to me in my position as acting employment relations director, but I did not have particular hands-on or direct knowledge of complaint operations. I supervised her.
Okay, so it's fair to say that Therese Freiberg at this point in 2019 was supervising complaints against MPS employees for both employee relations and employee rights. Is that correct?
She was.
Object to the form. There's various complaints. Could you be more specific, please?
Can you clarify your
Right.
question?
Well, so we've got, it's true. We've got employee relations. We've got Matt Chasen's outfit. We've got employee rights. So the one I'm talking about here is employee rights and employee relations. So we're talking about complaints directed at employee rights or employee relations. Were you supervising those investigations in any way during October of 2019?
Again, my complaint still stands the same. There's two different things. What are you asking about? Oh, I guess to be clear, Judge, I'm sorry. I will object to the compound question.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you take it as each part separately? So
Okay.
State your
I can do
question.
that. No problem. Let's clarify there. So were you supervising investigations into employee rights in October of 2019?
I think I was already stating that.
I'm sorry, Jim. I'm still going to object. I don't understand your question.
Just answer the question because it looks like he understands it. So just go ahead, Mr. Gordon.
So I think I've been clear. Therese Freiberg had immediate supervision and oversight over that component of ERAD, which was internal discrimination complaints and harassment complaints. I supervised her.
Okay. Now I understand. So that was employee rights or employee relations at that time?
So just to be more complex and nuanced, I advised that those two units, employee rights and employment relations, were separate, distinct units, probably the first year. So basically November 2018 to November 2019. And at that point, I actually did not have any supervisory authority over ERAD at all. ERAD meaning Employee Rights Administration Division. So, but once they were folded together, then I was the director of the department in which those operations occurred, but I was not directly involved in those operations.
Okay, I think I got that though. So, and when was employee rights and employee relations merged?
I think it was November of 2019, approximately.
Okay, so when Miss Tate files her first complaint in October of 2019, they were two separate entities, but approximately a month later, they were combined under your supervision. Is that accurate?
To the best of my recollection.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Can you explain to me, based on your supervision of those two entities, what's the difference between employee rights and employee relations?
Objection to relevance.
What is the relevance?
Sure. We're trying to figure out what her there's a couple of things and why this becomes relevant. We're just trying to follow the track of her path of her original complaint. To get through this structure, we're bouncing around in this labyrinthine employee rights, employee relations. We change this date, change this person, the supervisor's now the subordinate's now the supervisor. So I'm just trying to figure out what happened to her complaint, and I'm trying to lay the foundation for that.
Well, I would say if you're trying to figure out, that's the process of discovery, and we're past discovery, we're in hearing. So if in terms of that, Judge, that would be my objection. If you don't know what you're asking for, this is just a fishing expedition during the hearing. And I submit that's not what we're here for. So if you have it, so again, my question is the relevance here?
Why don't we just let him go on? Because the more we object, it just drags it out even farther. So why don't you restate your question and Mr. Gordon answer your question?
Thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. Mr. Gordon, can you explain to us the difference between employee rights and employee relations? If you know.
Employment relations and employee rights were each separate units that belong to the Office of Human Resources. They had different functions originally, and separate and distinct. So that employee rights, which I managed beginning 2011, was responsible for discrimination and harassment complaints, both internal and external, meaning ERD, EEOC, job accommodation issues, FMLA, leave of absence issues, unemployment issues. So it was a specialized unit, and still is, that addressed those issues. Employment relations addressed everything else, essentially. So when we merged, we continued to have our separate, distinct identity, only we folded into employment relations.
Okay. What outcomes, if any, are possible in the employee rights, in an employee rights complaint?
An employee rights complaint, the typical outcomes would be non-disciplinary corrective action, which is typically training or mentoring. I'm not sure what that has to do with this case.
But isn't it also true that those are the only outcomes that are possible in an ERAD investigation?
And I'm going to object to relevance.
Yeah, now it does seem like we're going through something that I don't know why we're spending time on it, Attorney Cross.
Okay, fair enough. What path did Miss Tate choose, if you know?
So Ms. Tate, I believe, filed a discrimination internal complaint with employee rights, and it was, I believe, investigated by Yashika Spears under the supervision of Therese Freiberg.
Great. And to your knowledge, is there a policy at MPS to tell the supervisor if an employee files a complaint against that supervisor?
I'm going to object as to the relevance.
Yeah, what is the relevance of whether or not Ms. Tate's supervisor at the time she filed her complaint knew about her complaint? Because we're talking about her not getting a position years later.
No, great. So what we're not just talking about whether in this situation the supervisor is told about the complaint. We're asking generally, is it the policy here, because we know that from Ms. Spears that it is, that that they tell the supervisor as part of the complaint process. So that's the first issue is did that happen here? The second issue is, generally speaking, do they tell the complainant, do they tell the alleged bad actor who the complainant is?
Again, I'm gonna repeat, this is completely irrelevant. If she wants to know if it happened here, that's relevant. Nothing else is.
Well, yeah, so just answer it as it relates to Ms. Tate's complaint that she filed.
I have no idea how that complaint was handled. I wasn't involved.
Okay, did you ever speak to Ms. Tate?
Have I spoken to Ms. Tate? Yes, I think I've spoken to her on the phone and via email.
Okay. In what capacity, or why did you speak to Ms. Tate over the phone and via email?
I think there were various capacities. I think I may have spoken to her about a grievance she filed regarding her discipline while she was employed by building operations. I would have been over that grievance operation as acting director.
Okay.
I think I also spoke to her about accommodation issues. I was still involved in accommodation issues somewhat because of my lengthy experience doing that, to take some pressure off of employee rights. So those are what I recall.
Okay. But so you did have contact with Ms. Tate regarding her complaint, correct?
Objection, that's the Ms. Tate's testimony.
No, I had no discussion with her about her harassment discrimination complaint.
But you did have discussion with her about her grievances, correct?
As I recall, I had some conversation with her about her grievance, or maybe it was an email.
Okay. Now, you already testified that you were the second line of review on this, correct?
Review on what?
Objection, review of what?
Well, that's what you had testified, that you, at this time, you were the second line of review for complaints. Or did I get that wrong?
You're talking about her harassment discrimination complaint. I was the second line over that operation. I mean,
Okay, and how about her
as
grievance?
I understand, Yashika Spears did the investigation. And so the next, she reported to Therese Freiberg, who reported to me.
How did you get that understanding?
How did I get that understanding of the hierarchy of the office?
No, who did the investigation and what happened with the investigation?
Because Yashika Spears was responsible for investigations back then. And I guess maybe based on the conversations going on today, that Yashika Spears was directly involved with Ms. Tate and the investigation. And it's just my general understanding that that's how it worked, is Ms. Spears would do the investigation and Ms. Freiberg would oversee that operation.
Okay, how did you come to speak to Ms. Tate about her grievance?
I was in charge of the grievances as acting director. And
Were
so
you directly in charge or in some other way?
pardon me?
Were you directly in charge or in some other way?
I don't recall if I was directly involved in her grievance or not. If I recall looking at her grievance dispositions, two of my staff actually signed the dispositions. But I may have been involved in some way. I seem to have some recollection of being involved. But part of it is, she has a brother named Tate, and he had grievances, I believe. And so it may be that I'm crossing the two Tates, but I seem to recall communicating with Ms. Tate.
Okay, and again, by email and by telephone.
As far as I recall, I can't say for certain.
Okay, and when would that have happened?
I mean, it was 2 years ago, maybe. I think it must have been 3 years ago. So I don't recall when things happened. I don't recall.
Okay, do you recall if she was on FMLA leave at that time or something else?
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you recall, since you worked on this grievance, do you recall what the disposition of the grievance is?
I'm going to again object that it mischaracterizes the testimony.
You can answer the question if you know what the disposition of the grievance was.
Yes, I do know the disposition. There were two grievances, and I do know the disposition. She was originally given a 5. Well, actually, I think there may have been 3 grievances. So there were 2 suspensions. One was 5 days for poor performance, and one was 5 days for customer service, inappropriate conduct toward others. And so each of those grievances was reduced to a 3-day suspension from the 5-day.
Why?
Because, as I recall, the suspension letter mentioned that there had been prior discipline. And as I recall, there had not been any recent prior discipline. And so we determined, or the disposition holder determined, that it should be reduced. I think I was probably briefed on the ongoing grievance, because typically we roundtable things at staff meetings, and the staff will contact me for questions. So I was familiar with what transpired.
Who made that decision?
Object to form. What decision?
Right. He said there was 3 grievances. So what decision are you talking about?
Sure. Who made the decision for the disposition of the first grievance, sir?
So, I mean, I don't know, the first or second. One, I think, was Lisa Gilmore, reduced the 5-day to a 3-day. And I think Sean Lees reduced the other 5-day to a 3-day.
Okay, and what about the third one?
I think Emily, I can't recall her last name. She's another specialist. I think she determined that that letter should be removed from the file.
Okay, and do the specialists make the final determination or somebody else?
I think as director, I could overrule a decision, but typically the specialist will make the decision, and it won't be overruled.
So it's fair to say that you not only agreed with the decision, but you're the one who made the decision. Is that correct?
I don't think that's what I said at all.
Sure. Well, you're the one who supervised. You said you didn't overrule it. Is that right?
That's correct. I didn't overrule it.
Okay. Did those, do you have any knowledge of whether the grievance documents were supposed to be placed in Ms. Tate's employment file?
I'm going to object as to employment file. I don't understand the question. As Ms. Tate has previously testified, there's multiple files. So if you could be more clear.
Do you understand what an employment file is, sir?
I understand the situation and what an employment file is, yes.
Well, can you answer my question, please?
So building operations is somewhat unique because they have a hard copy paper file that they keep at the department level. And then there's the typical employment file that is managed by Human Resources. It's a digital file.
Okay, so there's two files. There's one that's paper copy and that's placed in the dungeon. Is that right?
I didn't say anything about a dungeon.
Sure. Do you know what the employees at MPS call the basement of central services?
Yes, I understand. Well, there's a dungeon at Central Services.
Okay, there is a dungeon at central services. Okay. And was this, to your knowledge, was her paper employment file placed in that dungeon?
No,
Okay, where was it placed?
the paper file is maintained by Building Operations, which is on 11th Street. It's a separate building.
Okay, I understand.
It's about the 11th and Highland.
We can see it from here. So, okay. So, you also testified that there's a digital file, correct?
Yes.
Okay, when an employee requests their personnel records, which file do they receive? If you know.
They will typically interpret that as a request for the digital file, although I do know that Building Operations does provide a copy of the department file at request. And as I recall, Ms. Tate requested a copy of her department file and did receive it.
Why do you have that recollection?
Because I think it happened. I think I was informed when it happened. I think I may have helped facilitate the process.
Did you or did you not?
I think I testified. I may have helped facilitate the process. That's best I can recall.
Okay. Do all MPS employees have a departmental file and a separate digital file?
No, as I indicated, Building Operations is a little bit different from most departments of the district. They kind of have their own processes, and it's historically kind of been that way, that they kind of run their own shop and they keep their own departmental file. I mean, even schools, there's a school file, I suppose, but it's not really where personal actions are kept.
Which file is definitive?
I don't even know what that means, definitive.
Well, you assisted in responding to Ms. Tate's request for her personnel file, correct?
That's not what I said. I don't know why you keep recharacterizing my testimony. I've repeated twice already. I may have facilitated Ms. Tate's retrieval of her or review of her file, but that's the best I can recall.
Sure. When you may have facilitated the retrieval of her file, how were you able to may have discerning which file may have been the definitive one?
Judge, I'm going to object for two reasons. One, harassment of the witness. Two, asked and answered. And you know what? For a third one, I'm going to go ahead and say that Mr. Gorton's already testified that he may not know. He does not have an answer to this question.
Right. Yeah, so let's move on, Attorney Hitchcock-Cross.
Okay. So which file do you believe is definitive? The physical one or the digital one?
Same objections.
And he said he didn't know what you meant by definitive.
Sure, okay. In responding to a personnel records request, which file would you give to the requester? The
Objection.
digital one,
Relevance.
physical one?
You can answer the question, Mr. Gordon.
Requests do not come to me. The requests typically come to talent management or perhaps to building operations directly in case of building operations. So, I mean, I was only involved in that particular case as far as I can recall. And I'm not even sure if I was involved in that case versus her brother's case, because I think they both were trying to see their personnel files. I may be crossing my lines on it.
Okay.
I guess I feel like it would be appropriate to provide both files, or I may give an opportunity to review both files.
Okay. And to your recollection, did that happen?
I believe it happened.
Okay. Now, are you familiar with Carrie Ludwig?
Yes.
How are you familiar with Carrie Ludwig?
Well, she's the building operations manager, and I crossed paths with her doing business.
Okay. Did you cross paths with her in with regard to Miss Tate?
I'm sure I did cross paths with her in regard to Miss Tate.
Great. Can you explain those path crossings?
So I definitely have recollection of talking to her about her job accommodation request, because I was the accommodations administrator and she was the manager who could provide me with critical information about accommodations and would coordinate the accommodations. I may have spoken to her about the grievances. I'm not sure whether I spoke to her about Ms. Tate's grievances versus her brother's grievances. But I may have spoken to her about the grievances.
Okay. Excuse me.
I can't recall anything more at this time.
Okay. Are you aware of what job Mr. Tate has or held?
Yes, he was also an engineer.
Okay. Did you speak to Miss Ludwig about retaliation, accusations against her by Miss Tate?
I don't recall having a discussion with her about retaliation.
Okay, but you did discuss Miss Tate's complaint with her?
This objection, that's not Mr. Gordon's testimony. He said he could not recall.
Okay.
I don't believe I talked about the complaint at all. I don't know where you got that from. If you're talking about the internal discrimination complaint, I don't believe I had a conversation with her about that.
Okay, but did you discuss the grievance with her?
I may have discussed the grievance with her.
Okay, and again, Miss Tate's grievance, not Miss Tate's brother's grievance.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Did you ever discuss the changes to the suspensions with Miss Ludwig?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Could it have happened?
Yeah, it could have happened. I seem to remember having a conversation with her, and I think her brother, they both had grievances running at the same time. And I think they both were appealing their grievances. So I'm pretty certain I was involved with, had a conversation with Carrie Ludwig about one of them. I'm just not sure which.
Okay. And you testified before that it was unusual for you to get involved in the response to personnel records requests. Is that right?
Yeah, they don't come to me. So if they come to me, I may need to get involved.
Okay. And is it also unusual that you would have been personally involved in grievances at this time?
Objection, what's at this time?
Well, let's start with, really, as far as I understand it, sir, there's November of 2019 and post-November of 2019. Do I have that division correct?
No. I mean, I was acting director from November 2018 to November 2020. And during that time, I was overseeing the grievance process. I had a staff of specialists that would handle the grievances, but I also would be involved in grievances. I also did personally handle grievances. So,
Okay. I appreciate that. I'm sorry. I think I got 2019 confused with 20. So that I appreciate that distinction. So let's be clear. In terms of Ms. Tate's grievances, it would have been unusual for you to be personally involved in them. Is that correct?
it would, no.
No.
Where you got that from?
So you don't, you normally are personally involved in the handling of grievances during the time when Ms. Tate filed her grievance. Is that correct?
So I've testified that I was overseeing the grievance process and that my staff would routinely contact me and ask me questions about grievances. And so I was fairly familiar with grievances that occurred, not all of them necessarily, and I didn't review every single grievance that went out the door. But I was familiar with grievances.
Okay. Did you speak directly with every person who filed a grievance during that time period?
No.
No. Okay. Do you have any knowledge of whether or not MPS hires temporary employees?
I've heard about it.
Okay, what is your knowledge regarding MPS's hiring of temporary employees?
I understand that Talent Bridge is a company that provides temporary employees to MPS, depending on particular positions. I believe in building operations, there's temporary help services we also rely on that are not Talent Bridge. I understand that food service, school nutrition relies on temporary employees.
And how do you come to have that understanding?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I first became aware of it. I do know that MPS, as I recall, had its own temporary kind of substitute food service assistants back in the day. I've been around since '97, and at some point we eliminated that position and began relying on Talent Bridge for substitute support.
Do you know why?
I'm gonna object to relevance.
Yeah, what is the relevance, Attorney Hitchcock-Cross?
Great, we're just trying to figure out what the policy is for hiring temporary employees as opposed to full-time employees and why they do it.
It's not relevant. Let's move on.
Thank you.
Just so I can be clear, it's not relevant whether or not why they hire temporary employees?
No, because your client has said that she wasn't hired as a permanent employee. That's what you're trying to show, is that she was retaliated against in that regard.
Sure, but part of the motivation could be why.
Attorney Hitchcock Cross, do not argue with me. I've told you to move on. Let's move on.
Okay. Do you have an understanding of the wage structure for temporary employees as opposed to permanent employees?
I don't know what the wage structure is for temporary employees.
Do you have a general understanding?
Objection. He already testified. He does not know.
Right. If he doesn't know, let's move on.
Well, do you understand why MPS hires temporary employees as opposed to
Objection.
permanent employees?
I've already
Objection.
told you we're not going into that. Let's move on.
Yeah. Well, do you understand whether or not temporary employees make more than permanent employees?
Same objection.
If you know the answer, go ahead, Mr. Gordon.
No idea.
Okay. In your capacity as, well, let's just say in your capacity, have you ever received a complaint against a food service employee?
Objection to relevance.
Yes, what is the relevance? Now we're going way off topic.
Well,
She
we're
didn't
trying to
file a
get-
complaint when she was a food service employee. She filed a complaint before she retired as a custodian or in the building operations department. I'm not going to have you go into all these other complaints, Mr. Hitchcock Cross. You need to focus on what the allegations are that your client made.
Sure. Well, do you have understanding of if a food service employee made a complaint versus a temporary employee made a complaint, how that would be addressed?
Objection. Same objection. This is irrelevant to Ms. Tate's the issue at hand.
It is.
Well-
Let's move on.
So if I might, though, the issue that we're trying to understand what the job conditions are and the difference between the job conditions. So we're looking at her work as a temporary employee versus what she would have been doing as a permanent employee. That's what I'm trying to find out if he has knowledge about.
That's not what your question was. You're asking about complaints, which has nothing to do with what you just said. So let's move on.
Okay. After Miss Tate retired, Mr. Gordon, what connection, if any, did you have with her at that time or after that time?
Excuse me.
Question of the form of the question. What time are you talking about?
Any
She
time
said-
from the time she retired until present.
When did she retire? That might help me. I don't know.
Okay. Well, then
She
let's
said in
say-
early 2021.
Okay. So if it was early 2021, I was no longer acting director. I was manager of employee rights. In my role as employment rights manager, I was responsible for addressing formal complaints filed with the ERD. And I believe she had one or two. So my role would have been to manage those cases.
So you investigated her allegations in the ERD complaint, is that correct?
Objection. That's not what he testified to.
I don't know what stage those cases were when I returned to employment rights. So if they'd already been investigated, then I wouldn't investigate them again. And we also had some employment relations specialists that were handling some of the complaints when I returned. So I don't recall if I directly investigated or not.
Okay. But you did participate in the responding to this particular ERD complaint, is that correct?
I just recall having management responsibility of the case and having conversations with the city attorney's office about the case. And I think I was involved in certain processes such as mediation. That's what I recall. If I was involved in submitting some type of position paper, it certainly is consistent with my duties. I've been involved in a lot of position papers. But I don't recall whether I was involved in doing so in those particular cases. I think I did actually probably investigate this current case. I think I probably was involved with that.
Okay. And what was the results of your investigation, if any?
I'm going to object as to attorney-client work product here.
You can answer the question. Go ahead.
I didn't find any discrimination or retaliation. I didn't find that the decision maker, Renee Slutton, I can't recall her full name, I didn't find that she had any knowledge of prior EEO activity.
Okay. And to be clear, you've never been trained in doing EEO investigations, correct?
No, that's not true. I've attended seminars. I mean, I've been doing EEO investigations since 2001. So I've got 24 years of doing them. So yeah, I think I know how to do an EEO investigation.
But not because anybody's told you, just because of your on-the-job work experience, correct?
I just said I attended seminars.
You can
Again, I'm going
continue,
to
Mr.
object.
Yeah, and Mr. Gordon, you can answer the question.
I just said I attended seminars.
So if somebody trained you incorrectly on the job, you would be continuing to do an incorrect investigation. Is that correct?
Objection, hostile work. I'm sorry, he's harassing a witness.
Yeah, that is harassing. Let's ask another question.
Okay. Well, so you have no other basis except for your work experience for determining whether or not there was retaliation in this case, correct?
Again, I'm going to object. That's mischaracterizing his testimony. He already testified that he's been to seminars. He has a JD. Please stop mischaracterizing his
What seminars have you been to that would allow you to investigate Ms. Tate's claims?
I'm going to object against relevance.
You can answer the question, Mr. Gordon.
I mean, I've been to various seminars. I can't recall every seminar I've gone to. I mean, I'm submitting 15 CLE credits every year. I get it's like what's a total of 30 CLE credits every 2 years, and significant part of those are EEO type of cases. And I will say that when I'm doing the investigations, they're in coordination with the city attorney's office, and so I've teamed up with assistant city attorneys for the past 24 years. I guess it wouldn't be 24 years, it began in 2001, so let's say 21 years.
So it's fair to say that your position that there is no discrimination in Ms. Tate's case, that also comes from the city attorney's office?
Objection, attorney-client privilege.
Right. We're not going to get into what he discussed with the attorneys.
Sure, we didn't ask that. We just asked he's just testified that that was part of the decision-making process. So we need to understand if he's advocating here or if he's a fact witness. So did your determination and conclusions on Ms. Tate's complaints with the ERD, was that made in conjunction with the city attorney's office?
I'm going to again object to attorney-client privilege.
You can answer the question, but don't tell us what you discussed with the city attorney's office.
When I do an investigation, I will, and these are formal complaints, by the way, so It's not, I'm not talking about internal investigations. The complaint has been filed. I investigate the complaints by talking to the witnesses and looking at the documents, and I come to my own internal conclusion on the matter. And then I will write a position paper on it. And when I do that, the city attorney's office will read it and confer with me about it. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Is there any time in which you, after you confer with the city attorney's office, that your opinion has changed?
I'm going to object.
Yeah, let's move on. We're getting so far off topic of what this case is about, Attorney Cross.
All right, I appreciate that. If we can have 1 second here to confer with my client, hopefully we can wrap this up.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go back on the record and then Attorney Cross, you can continue.
Great, thank you very much. We are finished here. We'll pass the witness.
All right, Attorney Headley, do you have any questions for Mr. Gorton?
I do, and just for clarification purposes, he was on my witness list. I understand that we're still in respondent or complainant's case in chief. Are you okay if I go outside of it just so we can wrap all of this up together?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Judge. Mr. Gordon, I'm going to direct your attention to the summer of 2021. That would be, I will direct your attention specifically to July and August of 2021. In July and August of 2021, were you aware that Miss Tate filed an application to become a food service assistant with MPS?
So I don't know what dates align with what, but I did not know about the application or rejection for the school nutrition position until I received the ERD complaint. So I'm not sure when I received that. I'm not sure when she applied or rejected, but I wasn't aware of anything while that process was ongoing.
Okay. Did you in July or August of 2021 speak before Miss Tate applied for the food service position? Did you speak with Renee Slaughton-Beauchamp regarding Miss Tate?
No, I did not have any conversation with Renee Slaughton-Beauchamp about Ms. Tate until after I received the ERD complaint regarding this case.
Did you have any conversations with anybody in food service or food or nutrition services in before you found out about this complaint? Wait, I'm sorry, strike that. That was a horrible question. Did you have any conversations with anyone else in nutrition services regarding Miss Tate in the summer of 2021 before you found out about this complaint?
No, did not have a conversation with anybody in school nutrition or Laquita or anybody else. I didn't know about the application. So I didn't have any discussion with anybody about her with anybody in school nutrition or anybody involved in that hiring process.
That's all my questions.
Do you have anything else from Attorney Hitchcock-Cross?
Judge, thank you. I appreciate
right.
this witness participation here today.
Sure. Who is your next witness then, Attorney Cross?
We have no more. We rest.
All right. So then, Attorney Headley, you can put your witnesses on.
Okay, Judge, I'll need a minute to obviously get in contact with them. Can we go off the record?
Sure. We'll go off the record. Who's going to be your first witness?
I